Part 1 of The Martians and Us, From Apes to Aliens.
This is the history of British science fiction. The stories we've told the world of alien invasions, strange mutations, and Big Brother.
What happened to you here is forever.
But one theme has dominated: evolution. Where did we come from? Where are we going? And what will we change into when we get there? Welcome to the history of your future. I drew a breath, set my teeth, gripped the starting lever, and went off with a thud. The night came like the turning of a lamp, and in another moment came tomorrow. Tomorrow night came black, then day again, night again, day again, faster and faster still. As I put on pace, night followed day like the flapping of a black wing.
Science fiction was godfathered by H.G. Wells. We were the original source of much science fiction. And of course, you couldn't have any science fiction before there was legitimate science to base it on, which puts about 100 years ago.
London, 1895. And in his book, The Time Machine, H.G. Wells has just invented time travel. He invented science fiction along with it. Alien invasion, bizarre mutations, invisibility, trips to the moon. In the following 5 years, he would write the novels that defined the folklore of the technological age.
The thing about Wells is he comes into a genre that doesn't really exist. There are precedents for what he does, but there isn't such a thing as science fiction, or scientific romance was the term he used. And then basically he gets there first to every major theme. And partly it is that he was a man of prodigious imagination, and partly he was just there at the right time. He came to a field where people hadn't done the obvious things.
This dazzling creative flurry owed much to the scientific theory that had fascinated Wells since he was 15. Evolution. Where did we come from? Where are we going? And will we get eaten along the way? It's the big idea that has driven much of British science fiction ever since. Wells studied biology at Imperial College London, then became a journalist, scraping a living writing about science. The Time Machine was his first novel, and perhaps his most important.
At the time, there was a lot of discussion going on about the fourth dimension, the notion of time as a fourth dimension, similar to the three dimensions of space, which therefore made it available as something you could move along in either direction. Wells took hold of it and imagined that one might construct a machine that could actually move back and forth along the time axis. And that was an extremely useful literary device.
Wells lived in the age of the machine. His time travel device has "Made in Victorian Britain" stamped all over it, full of brass and motion.
He was one of those people who seemed to be constantly straining at the edge of technology. There's that thing that throbs throughout his whole oeuvre is that love of machines.
He saw himself as the coming man, as the new generation, the new democracy as he calls it, which is going to be this new group of engineers, of scientific experts, technocrats as we call them, who are in effect going to replace this class which had been brought up with a classical education but actually, say, didn't know how to build radios or didn't know how to construct aircraft, and this was going to be the future, and in a way, he was right.
But for all his fanciful contraptions, Wells never forgot that this was not rocket science. It was storytelling. Rocket science fiction, if you like.
The bottom line for Wells is plausibility. Whether or not it could be real, and Wells as a scientist knows fine well that it probably couldn't. He knows perfectly well there will never be anti-gravity paint, but it doesn't stop him using it, in his stories. Most readers, I think quite rightly, don't care whether or not the science is accurate. They care whether or not it sounds accurate.
We all saw the lever turn. I'm absolutely certain there was no trickery. There was a breath of wind, and the lamp flame jumped. One of the candles on the mantel was blown out, and the little machine suddenly swung around, became indistinct, was seen as a ghost, as an eddy of faintly glittering brass, and it was gone, vanished.
It's a great science fiction technique, actually, to distract the reader with essentially irrelevant detail and then walk briskly on. You think you've seen it all, in fact you've only seen a few shadows and smoke and mirrors. All illusion.
What was extraordinary about Wells's time machine was not how it traveled through time, but how far it went. In mid-Victorian England, there was time, but not much of it. Everyone knew when the world had begun, 4070 BC, when God made the earth. But then came Darwin, and history got a lot longer.
Everybody more or less blindly assumed that time had begun about 6,000 years ago, and you got that number by adding up the ages of the prophets in the Old Testament. And if you look at Darwin's own copy of the Bible, he has penciled in dates at various episodes which suggest a very young Earth.
Darwin's theory had the power to pull the rug from underneath the Victorians' feet. The Earth was billions of years old. God was nowhere to be seen. And what about the meaning of life? Was man just an ape in sensible shoes?
I think the reason Darwinism was initially so shocking was it persuaded everybody that they didn't live in a static world, a world that was always the same, always had been the same, always would be the same, which is a very comforting feeling. But they lived in a world that was changing and unstable and unpredictable. And that really was an upheaval, obviously in biology, but in much more than biology, in people's attitude to themselves.
The Victorian worldview was founded on the notion of progress, the British Empire sailing onwards to an even better future. Now, terrifyingly, evolution made progress uncertain. Change was the only thing on the menu, and this could just as well be for the worse.
Wells in particular comes along and says, well, wait a minute. Look at the fate of the dinosaurs. Remember that when a species is apparently at the height of its power, that is the moment when an imminent collapse might be on the horizon.
Once evolution had come out, it was picked up by philosophers and politicians of all kinds of hues with a notion of the certainty of progress, or more often the certainty of decay.
Entering with vigor into the progress versus decay debate, Wells sent his time traveler 800,000 years into the future to see how things have turned out.
What is initially a very sort of happy and sort of beautiful idyllic vision quickly becomes an amazingly bleak vision. The kind of Victorian dream of bourgeois progression really has no place.
He discovers that the human race has evolved into two species: the leisure-loving Eloi who live on the surface, and the brutish Morlocks who lurk underground.
His Darwinian perceptions are undercut, and they're undercut first by the Eloi, who are supposed to be this very refined advancement on the human race in the 1890s. And in fact, they've become simplistic, childlike, effete. And then secondly is what's happening underground, under the earth, with the Morlocks, who are clearly simian. They're referred to as spiders, as lemurs, as apes. They are reverted creatures.
Wells's vision of the future had much to do with his own lowly past.
Wells's mother was a servant at Up Park, and at Up Park the servants' quarters were connected to the main house by subterranean tunnels, so the servants are moving back and forth in this subterranean world. That obviously made a strong impression on young Bertie, so his idea of the future of the working class once it becomes separate is that they live this subterranean existence beneath the world of their masters.